that had there been anyone in there, they certainly wouldn't be alive. It happened so fast, it didn't seem real. None of the attacks seemed real to me. I was bewildered. I couldn't understand why they would do it to us. I just didn't understand a thing at that point.
These guys didn't die for anything, they just died. They were slaughtered for nothing.
The assault was over, but the cover-up was about to begin. At 4 o'clock, the American naval attaché in Tel Aviv heard from the Defense Ministry that a ship had been attacked, in error. The American embassy immediately reported back to the State Department in Washington.
I was the first one that got the word, and my immediate reaction was it could not have been an accident.
Shortly before 10 in the morning, Washington time, the news was passed on to President Johnson.
He was rather inclined to agree with my view was that it had to have been an intended attack.
Johnson's belief that the attack was deliberate is preserved in the minutes of a White House meeting the following day. Also present was the CIA Director, Richard Helms.
And I know that for the first 24 hours the President was furious that something like this had gone on.
Whatever Johnson's inner circle thought privately, officially they accepted Israel's apologies and its explanation.
Everybody seemed to be a little appalled at the Israelis, but this was not reflected in the public positions that the collective group had outside that room, and I think we were overprotective of the Israelis at that point.
I think the feeling was that the pressure, political pressure, would be too much, and they were just going to let it go. That and thought maybe it would just go away. As a matter of fact, he said to me, standing in the cabinet room one day, "Have you looked at the New York Times? The attack on that American ship is on page 29, when it should have been on the front page." And then I guess various people got at him and so forth, and he changed his mind. But I don't think he changed his mind, he just changed his actions.
President Johnson's public stance allowed Israel also to cover up the attack. Israel has always maintained that it was a series of mistakes. None of the former fighter pilots would agree to speak, but one of the torpedo boat sailors gave us his account.
We were inexperienced at the time. We were probably a little trigger happy, and it was a war zone. No one should have been there, and anybody who is there is doing it at his own risk.
Israel admits the reconnaissance planes had identified the Liberty during the morning. The Air Force notified Naval HQ in Haifa, where the ship's position was marked on a combat information map. Later that morning, Navy HQ received reports of the Sinai coast being shelled from the sea, but by this time, say the Israelis, the Liberty had been erased from their naval map. When the patrol boats went to find the source of the alleged shelling, the only ship they found there was the Liberty. Then the patrol boats misread the mystery ship's speed on their radar. They thought it was making 28 knots, so could only be an enemy warship.
The way you do it is by taking the direction and distance from the radar to the target on the radar screen, and if you do it for a short period, for just several minutes, the differences in the speed can be fantastic, anything between going backwards and 30 knots forward. So that's a very normal mistake.
And so the Air Force was summoned to catch the fast-moving target. Then, says Israel, the sailors made another fatal mistake, confusing the ship with the El Qusair, an Egyptian transport vessel half the Liberty's size.
It looked very similar to the El Qusair. There were some differences, and again you have to remember that she had already been fired upon by the airplanes.
This was when word of the attack first reached the head of the Navy, who happened to be Udi Arel's father. He'd been at Haifa Harbor, out of radio contact, and had just got back to Navy HQ.
Of course I was furious. The minute she was torpedoed, and it was clear to me actually that she couldn't have made 28 knots. So I actually immediately ordered definite identification. And then he reported that the flag was going up, was being hoisted. And then his first identification was Soviet. I said, oh my God. Come closer. I came closer and he identified her as an American ship.
Whatever the ship's identity, the Israelis vehemently denied that they'd ever fire at life rafts in the water.
I don't believe it. I never saw such a thing. There was nothing even resembling a life raft, and we certainly didn't shoot at it.
We are taking part of the blame, but only part of the blame. We made most of the mistakes. They made many mistakes on the spot, and by the fact that the Liberty should not have been there.
But the evidence points to Israel knowing the ship's identity and wanting it sunk fast. This U.S. Air Force intelligence analyst was following radio intercepts of the attack.
The communications I had in my hands originated from an Israeli flight commander. Evidently, from his questioning to the ground control, one can deduce that he had been given specific orders to attack that ship before he left the ground. And when he saw it was an American ship, he questioned those orders. And he questioned those orders to his ground control. That same conversation that I had in my hands specifically noted that the ground control said, proceed with the attack, and there was still doubt in the Israeli pilot's mind. And he said, no, this is American, repeat those orders again, and he was told flat out, do attack this ship.
That night was a very long night. I'm thinking at that point, I hope we don't sink, because I knew the extent of the damage. I'd been down and taken a look at it, and I knew that we were in bad, bad shape. We had a lot of dead folks, a lot of gravely wounded folks on that ship, including the captain, who toward the end of the shift, toward the end of the 15 hours, had regained consciousness and was sitting up in his chair, but not saying much, just sat.
Help was finally on its way. Ships from the 6th Fleet were steaming towards the Liberty and would reach her the next morning.
It was quite a sight to see so much of a flotilla there, the carriers. We looked and we said, God, what a flotilla. Where the hell were you? Why didn't you come? I mean, everybody aboard the ship said the same thing.
The Liberty was now heading to Malta for emergency repairs. An important visitor was helicoptered aboard. Admiral Isaac Kidd was leading a naval inquiry into the attack. His behavior surprised the sailors.
I thought he was a very strange person because he took his stars off and walked around, tried to walk around like a regular guy. You know, everybody knew who he was. But I thought that was rather strange. I didn't buy into that one real easy.
He took his eagles off, and he says, well, guys, he says, you just pretend that I'm one of you guys now. Tell me all about it. So they told what they seen in that, and after a while, he put his pins back on, and he says, I don't want you guys talking about this at all to anybody, your shipmates. Don't be giving any interviews here while we're in Malta. He says anything that has to be told through your division officer, through your captain. Don't be talking to your family.